Hello. Okay, so what I want to do is I just want to go through this 20 market. Like I said, basically, this migration as a 20 marker, it's never been asked as a long essay. There's no past items or questions to refer to. It could occur in the new exam. They want you to know things about globalization and postmodern views. So they could ask it. So I would spend time reviewing it. Questions that they could ask, so the impact of globalization on migration patterns. Or the effect of immigration on family patterns, or the impact of migration on government policies. So we'll have a little bit of a look now. I did this in revision session and I basically got students to come up with an item. If you notice, or once you start doing lots of practice questions, you start to notice that the item's there to give you clues, and it'll give you some sort of debate within the item and so on. So you can actually write your own items and start to use them in your answers. But plan an answer, use the mini mark scheme that I've put together just to practice these questions. So I'm just going to look at this one, and there's the item that Sam has put together. And basically the question's asking you to apply the material from item 2A. Okay, so this is really, really important that you refer to something from the item in 2A. You need to use your own knowledge. So basically this is where the mark scheme comes in. You need to evaluate. So that means that as well as looking at the view that migration is a problem, possibly you might want to talk about the view that migration is beneficial for society, that we've moved into a postmodern age, and so on. Okay, so you're just going to make sure that you are using both sides. Before you start answering, I would expect you to pick out from the item the bits that you're going to use in your answer. So for example, you've got a definition of what migration is, the movement of people from place to place. That would be perfect in your intro. You've got the item in straight away. And then you might, you've got these ideas of immigration, emigration and net migration. And you might want to define what those are as well. So that means you have to use your own knowledge. So immigration, movement of people into a country, emigration, movement of people out, and net migration, the difference between people moving in and moving out either expresses a net increase or a net decrease. And that could then allow you to analyse this idea about migration as a problem for society, because when you start to read that firstly, you're assuming that we're just talking about immigrants, but you can actually then start to refer about why people might move to places like Canada or Australia, and the movement of people emigrating. And is that seen as a problem in society? So that might be something that you might want to think about. Okay, so I would start off by defining those. Okay, and then you've got this speeding up of the rate of migrants. So that's called acceleration. So you might want to annotate that there and put acceleration. And then you've got an example of this acceleration, that you've got the United Nations, that international migration has increased by 33%. Okay, so again, that might be a fact that you put into your answer and that you develop on as well. And then you've got some people, they may see this as a problem for society, this increase in migration. So I would identify in your item, who are those some people, okay? Because not all people are going to see it as a bad thing. Now here we've got the new right. They might see migration as being problematic, especially if it impacts family diversity or it causes an increase in crime or anything like that. That could be your new right. And then you might even mention feminist as well. If you remember, you've watched the previous podcast, you've got the feminisation of migrants. So then you could actually talk about if the increase in migrants are female, and they're more likely to be pigeonholed into these expressive roles, feminists are going to find that as quite problematic. So you could actually mention about the feminist. Now, not all people will agree that this idea of migration as being a problem in society. Some people might criticise that, and they could be your postmodernist because they like this idea of diversity, they like this idea of globalization, that the world is becoming a little bit more interconnected and it's becoming a smaller place. So they would actually maybe see migration as not being problematic. Okay, so they're things that you might want to just pick out from the item, and then once you've done that, you've got a wide range of a basis of an answer there that you can start to then explore within your answer. Okay. So just in summary then, I would start off by defining what migration is. Mention the item, there's a definition in the item there, and then mention the keyword acceleration, that it's going up. You might want to mention the United Nations as a bit of a statistic, and then link it to the process of globalization, which is a keyword according to postmodernist, and say that globalization, that the world is becoming interconnected, it's become smaller, and it's not just about the migration of people, it is the migration of ideas and wealth and money and consumer goods and media and so on. Then you can get into the possible problems of migration, and there was a point in the item that mentioned about this idea of a loss of jobs. Well, what you could pick up out there is that a loss of jobs leads to a divided working class. Basically, where you've got a job market where there isn't a lot of jobs, where there is higher levels of unemployment, migrants moving to take up jobs as a cheaper form of labour can form a little bit of conflict between the indigenous population and the people, the migrants who are moving in to work. Okay, and that creates this division between the working class, and this, you could link it to Marxism, and basically what you're doing there is that within Marxism, just to put it simply, you've got the bourgeoisie exploiting the proletariat. To make that system work, you've got to have these processes of alienation and exploitation. And basically, if people aren't aware that they are being exploited by the ruling class, that means the system stays as it is, and it works. And basically, it benefits the bourgeoisie if the working class are squabbling within themselves and rather diverting their attention away from the true nature of capitalism, which is the bourgeoisie who's really exploiting them. But the immigration or migrants are used by the bourgeoisie to divert the working class proletariat attention away from the real cause of oppression, which is the bourgeoisie. So you could write about that and the problem there, but then you could then start to say, well, lots of jobs, but what about people who emigrate to places like Australia because they have a sought after skills or whatever. Another one could be linking to government fears or public fears, for example, terrorism, that led to assimilation policies. We'd moved away from the 1950s, 1960s of multiculturalism. Multiculturalism was, let's value diversity, but then when you had 9/11 attacks in 2001, your policies by the government began to swing the other way, and then they argued that that migrants needed to blend into the population. So, for example, that could be that learning English, adopting British values, British customs, language, to make migrants be like us. And the problem is that causes marginalisation because it starts to pinpoint that there is an other group, and they become marginalised, and then you can start to bring in the impacts for these marginalised groups more likely to be susceptible to joining terrorist groups or whatever. You could then start to bring that in, those fears. Okay. Another point that you could point at problems is feminisation of migration. So feminists would argue that the movement of females filling in the service occupations which employ women, female labour, it tends to be cheaper, and fitting in for, in terms of female jobs. You could talk about the impacts on the dependency ratio. So immigrants are more likely to be younger. So actually they help the dependency ratio. So that's not really a problem. But then you can then start to bring in what is a problem, is that they're more likely to be younger and more fertile. So they have more children. But that's only a short-term problem. In the long run, those children will become the new set of workers. But then you can impact it on family diversity and bring in the new right in there as well, and counter-produce it by using postmodernism. And then at the end, refer back to the question, is migration actually a problem? Is this idea, and postmodernists would argue that no, it isn't. How you respond to migration is maybe the problem rather than the process itself. So that should give you a little bit of something to think about if you've got a question which is asking you about the impact of migration or the impact of globalization in society. Okay, so thank you for listening. Any questions, just bob me a message on Wamedu and I will get back to you. Thank you.